Have you ever wondered how far someone would go for love? I thought I knew the answer, until I discovered that my pregnant wife had ordered the death of my son's mother. My name is Marcus, I'm 34 years old, I live in Atlanta, and I'm going to tell you a story that completely changed my perception of what human beings are capable of doing when they believe they're fighting for love. If you're watching this, subscribe to the channel and comment what city you're watching from, because I want to know where you guys are following this craziness. What I'm about to tell you happened over the last 2 years of my life, and I swear by everything that's sacred that every word is true no matter how impossible it may seem. You're going to discover how an apparently perfect woman can hide secrets that would make a serial killer look like an amateur, how love can be used as a weapon of manipulation, and how sometimes the people we love most are exactly those we should fear most. Get ready, because this story will show you that reality can be much more terrifying than any horror movie you've ever watched. You know how it is when your life finally seems to be falling into place. I was going through that phase about 6 months ago when I met Victoria at the cafe I frequented every morning before work. She had this special way of smiling, you know, one of those smiles that make you forget even your own name for a few seconds. We started with those silly conversations about the weather, about Atlanta traffic, about how their coffee was better than the competition's. But there was something different about her, an intensity in her gaze that made me curious to know more about who she really was. She was a corporate lawyer, successful, lived alone in a fancy apartment downtown. Everything about her screamed independence and sophistication, two things I'd always admired in a woman. And for the first time in years, since my messy divorce with Lisa, I felt like I could open up to someone again. The first dates were like those romantic movies that play on TV on Sundays. Dinners at restaurants I didn't even know existed. Conversations that stretched into the early hours. Laughter that echoed through the darkest corners of my soul and brought a light I'd forgotten existed. Victoria had this incredible ability to make me feel like I was the most interesting person in the world. She listened to every word I said with attention that bordered on obsession. But at the time I interpreted this as genuine passion. We started seeing each other almost every day, and I found myself checking my phone every 5 minutes, waiting for a message from her. It was addictive, this feeling of being desired, of being chosen by someone as special as she seemed to be. But there's something about secrets that I learned the hard way. They always find a way to surface, especially when you least expect it. The problem was that I was living a lie by omission. Not that I was dishonest by nature, but some things are too complicated to explain right off the bat, you know? How do you tell a sophisticated woman who clearly never had children that you have a 13-year-old boy who lives with your problematic ex-wife? How do you explain that your life isn't just yours, that you have responsibilities that go far beyond romantic dinners and spontaneous weekends? I kept trying to find the right moment, that perfect moment that never came. With each passing date, the lie grew bigger, heavier like a stone in my stomach that only grew. Victoria talked about trips she wanted to take, about future plans, about how our life would be perfect together, and I could only think about how all of that would crumble when she discovered the truth about me. The bomb exploded on a random Tuesday, one of those days you think will be just another normal day in your life. We were at her apartment watching Netflix and eating pizza when my phone rang. It was Ethan, my son, calling because he'd forgotten his science project at my house and needed to turn it in the next day. I answered, trying to be discreet, speaking quietly. But Victoria isn't stupid. She immediately noticed something was wrong in my voice, in the way I was talking. When I hung up, she looked at me with that expression every man knows, the one that says, "You have exactly 5 seconds to explain to me what's happening." I took a deep breath and let it all out at once, like ripping off a Band-Aid, quick and painful. "Victoria, I have a son. He's 13 years old and his name is Ethan. I should have told you before, but I didn't know how." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria stared at me for about 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours, and I could see thoughts racing through her head, like cars on a racetrack. First came anger, then disappointment, then something I couldn't quite identify, but that gave me a chill. She got up from the couch and started pacing back and forth in the living room like a caged animal. "A son, Marcus. A 13-year-old son, and you didn't think it was important to tell me this in 6 months of dating." Her voice was too controlled, too calm, and that scared me more than if she had screamed at me. I tried to explain, talk about how complicated it was, about how I didn't want her to run away scared, but every word that came out of my mouth seemed to only make things worse. Victoria stopped walking and looked directly into my eyes. And in that moment I saw something in her I'd never seen before, a coldness that made me question if I really knew the woman I was falling in love with. "Is there anything else you're hiding from me, Marcus?" Her question came loaded with an intensity that made me swallow hard. I could lie. I could omit the fact that I still had to deal with Lisa regularly because of shared custody, but something told me it would be better to put all the cards on the table at once. "I have shared custody with his mother. We need to communicate about Ethan's things, about school, doctor, those things." Victoria laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was one of those bitter laughs that make your blood freeze in your veins. "Of course there is. And let me guess, you're friends because of the child, right?" The way she said friends made me realize I'd just stepped on a minefield I didn't even know existed. The night that should have been just another ordinary night had turned into the beginning of something I still didn't fully understand, but already sensed would change everything. Victoria spent the rest of the night asking questions that seemed more like a police interrogation than a conversation between boyfriends. She wanted to know everything about Lisa, about what our marriage was like, why we divorced, if I still felt anything for her. Each of my answers seemed to feed a strange hunger in her eyes, as if she were collecting information for some purpose I couldn't understand. I answered everything with the honesty I thought our relationship deserved, told her about Lisa's problems with alcohol, about how she became unstable after the divorce, about how I just wanted the best for my son. But while I talked, I saw Victoria processing every word like a lawyer preparing a case. When I finally left that night, she kissed me at the door with a passion that seemed desperate, as if it were the last time. "We'll find a way to make this work, Marcus. I promise." But there was something about that promise that made me more worried than relieved. The strange thing was that in the following days, Victoria seemed to have accepted the situation better than I expected. She started asking questions about Ethan, wanted to know about his hobbies, his favorite subjects at school, if he liked sports. She seemed genuinely interested in being part of our life, and I felt relieved thinking I had underestimated her capacity to love not just me, but also my son. She even suggested it would be cool to meet Ethan in person, maybe in a neutral place like a mall or park. Her excitement was contagious, and I started fantasizing about what it would be like to have a complete family again, with someone who really cared about my boy's well-being. But if there's one thing life has taught me, it's that when things seem too good to be true, it's probably because they are. And I was about to discover that Victoria's acceptance had a price I never imagined anyone would be willing to pay. The first meeting between Victoria and Ethan was scheduled for a Saturday at Lenox Square Mall, one of those safe places where you think nothing can go wrong. I was nervous like a teenager on a first date, sweating cold even with the mall's air conditioning working perfectly. Ethan arrived with Lisa, who handed me the boy with that look of disapproval I already knew well. "I hope this new girlfriend of yours knows that my son comes first," she said loud enough for Victoria to hear. I saw Victoria slightly frown, but she recovered quickly and approached with a smile that seemed straight out of a magazine. "You must be Ethan. Your father talks about you so much that I feel like I already know you." My son's response was a mumbled, "Hi," while looking at the floor, typical of any 13-year-old boy in embarrassing situations, but I could feel the tension in the air, as if there was a storm approaching and nobody wanted to admit it. Victoria tried everything to win Ethan over that first day. She offered to buy expensive sneakers, suggested going to the movies to watch an action film, even proposed going to the food court to eat hamburgers and fries. But my son, who was normally sociable and funny, was behaving as if he'd swallowed an iceberg. Every attempt at conversation from Victoria was answered with monosyllables. Every joke was received with a forced smile that lasted less than a second. I found myself playing mediator, trying to break the ice between two people who clearly weren't connecting. "Ethan, Victoria works with law just like those lawyers in the movies you like," I said in a desperate attempt to find common ground. "Cool," was all he responded, but the tone made it clear he thought it was anything but cool. Victoria started getting visibly irritated, and I could see that same coldness in her eyes that had appeared the night of the revelation. The situation got worse when we went to lunch at the mall restaurant, and Ethan casually mentioned something about his mother. "My mum said you look too young to date my dad," he blurted out in the middle of the meal, with that brutal honesty only children have. I almost choked on my soda, and Victoria turned so red I thought she was going to explode right there. "How interesting," she responded with a smile that didn't even come close to her eyes. "And what else did your mother say about me?" Ethan, who clearly didn't catch the danger of the situation, continued spilling comments Lisa had made about Victoria being just another one who won't last, and about how these women without children don't understand anything about responsibility. With each word, I saw Victoria getting more tense, her fingers gripping the fork with a force that made her knuckles turn white. When Ethan mentioned that Lisa had said Victoria probably just wanted to use me and then disappear, I thought she was going to get up from the table and leave. But Victoria didn't leave. Instead, she leaned forward and looked directly at Ethan with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. You know, Ethan, adults sometimes say things when they're hurt that aren't necessarily true. Maybe your mother is just worried because she doesn't know me yet. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath, like lava boiling under a thin crust of earth. Ethan, who wasn't stupid, realized he'd stepped on the ball and stayed quiet for the rest of lunch. But the damage was already done. I could see Victoria processing every word Lisa had said through my son, as if she were putting together a puzzle in her head. When we left the mall, she was different, more distant, as if part of her had disappeared during that conversation. Your ex-wife has very strong opinions about me for someone who's never seen me in her life, she commented in the car, and I felt a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. In the days that followed, Victoria started asking increasingly specific questions about Lisa. She wanted to know where she lived, what kind of car she drove, what time she took Ethan to school, if she worked or depended on the alimony I paid. At first I thought it was natural girlfriend curiosity, you know how it is, that need to better understand the situation, to be able to deal with it. But the questions became more detailed, more investigative. She wanted to know if Lisa drank during the day, if she went out with other men, if I thought she was taking good care of Ethan. It's just that I worry about you guys, she said, when I asked why so much interest. I want to make sure you and Ethan are safe. It seemed reasonable at the time, even romantic in a way, a woman caring so much about the family of the man she loved, but there was something in the way she absorbed each piece of information that made me feel like I was feeding a hunger I didn't understand. The second meeting with Ethan was even worse than the first. Victoria had prepared like it was a work presentation, arrived with a bunch of planned activities, places to go, things to do. But the more she tried, the more my son withdrew. It was like watching two people speaking completely different languages. Victoria talked about opportunities, about cultural experiences, about how she could help Ethan expand his horizons. Ethan just wanted to play video games and eat pizza. Simple things for a normal boy. You know, Ethan, when I was your age, my parents took me to museums and concerts. That's how I became the successful person I am today, she said in an attempt to sound inspiring. Cool, but I prefer playing FIFA, he responded without even looking up from his phone. I saw Victoria clench her fists under the table, and I realized she wasn't used to being rejected, especially by a child. The tension between them was so dense you could cut it with a knife. The last straw came when Ethan, in one of those coincidences of fate that change everything, mentioned that Lisa was dating someone new. My mum met a nice guy at her work. They went to dinner yesterday and she came home laughing, something that hadn't happened in a long time. I was happy for Lisa, honestly, because despite all our problems, I wanted her to be happy for our son's sake. But Victoria reacted as if she'd been slapped in the face. Oh, really? And what's this guy like? Is he married? Does he have children? What kind of work is your mother doing now? The questions came in a sequence too fast, with an urgency that scared even Ethan. He looked at me as if asking if he'd done something wrong, and I had to intervene. Victoria, relax. It's good that Lisa is meeting new people. The more stable she is, the better for everyone. But she didn't relax. In fact, she got even more tense, like a violin string about to snap. And in that moment I had my first real suspicion that there was something very wrong with the way Victoria saw this whole situation. When I took Ethan back to his mother's house that night, he pulled me aside before going in. Dad, I don't really like your girlfriend. She asks weird questions and looks at me in a strange way. My son's words hit me like a punch in the stomach, because I knew he was right, but I didn't want to admit it. Give her some time, son. She's just trying to get to know you better. It's hard for anyone to enter a family that already exists. But while I spoke, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Victoria had reacted to the news about Lisa's new boyfriend, the intensity of her questions, the way she seemed to be collecting information like a detective investigating a case. Ethan hugged me and said, "Okay, Dad, but if she does anything weird, you'll tell me, right?" I promised I would, without imagining that soon it would be my own son who would have strange information to tell me about the woman I thought I loved. The conversation that changed everything happened on a rainy Thursday, one of those nights when you just want to stay home watching something on Netflix and forgetting about the world's problems. Victoria had come to my apartment after work, and I could see she was restless since she arrived. She kept playing with her hair, drumming her fingers on the table, asking those apparently casual questions that weren't casual at all. "Marcus, tell me more about your marriage with Lisa. How did you meet? Why did you separate?" I sighed deeply because I knew that sooner or later this conversation would happen, but I wasn't prepared to relive those complicated years. "It's a long story, Victoria, and it's not very pretty." She moved closer on the couch, took my hand and said with that sweet voice she knew how to use so well, "I want to understand you completely, love. I want to know what hurt you so I can heal you." It seemed sincere at the time, but now I realized there was a hunger in her eyes that had nothing to do with love or healing. I started telling about how I met Lisa at a college party, how she was fun and spontaneous, completely different from the other girls I knew. At first, that spontaneity was exciting, but over time it turned into emotional instability. She was always kind of impulsive, did things without thinking about the consequences, made important decisions based only on the emotion of the moment. Victoria was drinking every word like it was water in the desert, asking specific questions about Lisa's behaviors, about how she reacted when she was angry, if she had friends, if her family supported me. "And after Ethan was born?" she asked, with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. That's when things got much worse. Lisa started drinking more, said she was depressed, that she couldn't handle the responsibility of being a mother. Every detail I shared seemed to be filed in Victoria's mind with surgical precision, and I was starting to feel like I was being interrogated instead of having an intimate conversation with my girlfriend. The worst period of our marriage started when Ethan was about 5 years old. Lisa had lost her third job in 2 years, always due to conflicts with colleagues or late arrivals because of hangovers. She would stay days without leaving the house, without showering, leaving Ethan practically to fend for himself. I'd come home from work and find my 5-year-old son trying to make a sandwich for himself because his mother was passed out on the couch. Victoria became visibly agitated with this information, but not in the way I expected. Instead of compassion or sadness, I saw something that looked more like satisfaction. "And you didn't try to take custody from her, a mother who drinks and neglects her son?" The question came loaded with an urgency that surprised me. "Victoria, it's not that simple. Lisa may have problems, but she loves Ethan, and at that time she still hadn't crossed lines that would justify taking a mother away from her own son." But I could see that Victoria didn't agree with my position, that she thought I was too weak, too tolerant of a situation she considered unacceptable. The conversation took a darker turn when I started telling about Lisa's more serious episodes. There was one night she disappeared for 3 days, left Ethan with me without warning anything. I was crazy with worry, thinking something had happened. When she came back, she said she had gone to a friend's house to cool her head and that I was making a storm in a teacup. Victoria leaned forward, her eyes shining with an interest that bordered on obsession. "And now, does she still drink? Does she still disappear without warning? How do you know Ethan is safe with her?" The questions came in bursts, as if she were a lawyer trying to build a case. I explained that Lisa had improved in recent years, that she had gone to therapy, that her new job seemed to be working well. "But she's still unstable, Marcus. People like that don't really change. They just get better at hiding their problems." The way Victoria said this gave me chills, as if she knew something about Lisa that I didn't know. It was when Victoria started asking questions about Lisa's current routine that I realized there was something very wrong with this whole situation. "What time does she take Ethan to school? What time does she work until? Does she live alone or with someone? What kind of car does she drive?" When I questioned why she wanted to know so many details, Victoria laughed and said it was just female curiosity, that women always want to understand the competition. "Competition? Victoria, Lisa isn't my competition. She's my son's mother, and our relationship is purely about co-parenting." But the expression on Victoria's face told me she didn't see things that way. For her, Lisa was a threat that needed to be neutralized, an obstacle between her and the perfect life she imagined having with me. "Marcus, you're very naive. Women like Lisa always find a way to cause problems. She may be better now, but what about when she finds out you're serious about me? What about when she realizes she might lose the influence she still has over you? It was as if Victoria was planting seeds of paranoia in my head, making me question things I didn't even think to question. The night ended with Victoria making me promise that I would be more careful with Lisa, that I wouldn't let her manipulate me using Ethan as an excuse. I just worry about you two, love. I don't want an unstable person to destroy the happiness we're building. It seemed reasonable, even protective on her part. But when she left that night, I was left with a strange feeling, as if I had just given someone a detailed map of all the weak points in my life. I started mentally reviewing everything I had told about Lisa, about our schedules, about Ethan's routine, and I realized I had provided enough information for Victoria to practically stalk my ex-wife if she wanted to. Paranoia started growing in my head like a weed, especially when I remembered the intensity with which Victoria absorbed every detail, as if she was studying for a test I didn't know existed. In the following days, Victoria started bringing up the subject of Lisa, with a frequency that made me uncomfortable. She always had a new theory about the reasons why my ex-wife did certain things, always a new suggestion about how I should deal with her. I bet she calls you more than necessary, right? It's typical of a jealous ex-wife. When I said that Lisa only called about issues related to Ethan, Victoria would roll her eyes, as if I were too naive to understand the mind games that women play. She started questioning every decision I made regarding my son, every concession I made to Lisa in the name of family harmony. You realize you're letting her control your life, right? That as long as you keep dancing to her tune, you'll never be able to truly move forward. And no matter how much I tried to explain that it wasn't control, that it was collaboration for Ethan's sake, Victoria always had a ready counter-argument, as if she had studied behavioral psychology just to win this argument. It was at this moment that I started to realize that Victoria didn't see Lisa just as a nuisance, but as an enemy that needed to be eliminated from the equation. Victoria's behavior started changing in subtle but noticeable ways, like when you feel something's wrong in the air but can't identify exactly what it is. She started showing up in places where I didn't expect to find her, always with perfectly plausible excuses. Oh, what a coincidence to find you here. I was passing by to buy some things and saw your car. It happened at the supermarket near Lisa's house, then at Ethan's school during a school presentation, and even at the medical clinic where I had taken my son for a routine consultation. At first I found all this casualness cute, interpreted it as a sign that she really cared about our family. But after 3 coincidences in 1 week, I started suspecting that Victoria was following me. When I questioned her, she laughed and said I was being paranoid, that Atlanta wasn't that big, and it was normal for people to bump into each other from time to time. Besides, I just want to be present in your life, Marcus. There's nothing wrong with that. But there was something very wrong. I just couldn't see the real extent of the problem yet. It was on a Friday that I discovered how far Victoria's obsession had gone. I was at work when I received a call from her, visibly upset. Marcus, I was passing in front of the building where Lisa works and saw something you need to know. My blood immediately froze, because the building where Lisa works wasn't a place Victoria would pass by chance. What were you doing there, Victoria? The question came out more aggressive than I intended, but she didn't lose her tone. I had a meeting with a client nearby and decided to take a look at the place where your son's mother works. Just curiosity. A blatant lie. Her office was on the other side of town, and the building where Lisa worked didn't have any company that could be Victoria's client. And what did you see that was so important? She took a deep breath, as if preparing to give me devastating news. She went out to lunch with that man Ethan mentioned, and Marcus, they didn't look like they were having a work conversation. They looked very intimate. The way she said intimate carried an insinuation that made me angry, not at Lisa, but at Victoria for spying on my ex-wife. What disturbed me most was realizing that Victoria had taken photos. Want to see? She asked with a sickly excitement. On her phone, there were at least a dozen photos of Lisa having lunch with a man I didn't know. The photos were taken from far away, zoomed in, as if Victoria were a private detective or something worse. Victoria, this is stalking. You can't go around chasing my ex-wife and taking photos of her. But instead of being ashamed or apologizing, she became defensive. I wasn't chasing anyone. I was protecting you, protecting Ethan. This woman could be bringing strange men around your son, and you don't even know about it. Her twisted logic was frightening, the way she could justify completely inappropriate behaviors as if they were acts of love and protection. But what scared me most was the satisfaction in her eyes when she showed the photos, as if she had found evidence of a heinous crime. Look at how she's looking at him, Marcus. Look at her body language. This woman is clearly romantically involved with this guy. Victoria's paranoia about Lisa started contaminating all aspects of our relationship. Any call I received from Ethan's mother was reason for interrogation. Why did she call? What did she want? How long were you talking? Did she say anything about me? It was like living with a federal police agent investigating an international conspiracy. When I said that Lisa had called to talk about a school meeting or about Ethan's medical appointment, Victoria always found a hidden motive. She could have sent a message. Why did she need to call? I bet she just wanted to hear your voice, feel like she still has power over you. And the worst part is that she managed to plant these seeds of doubt in my head. I started analyzing every interaction with Lisa through Victoria's paranoid lenses, looking for signs of manipulation where there probably weren't any. It was as if Victoria was reprogramming me to see my ex-wife as a constant threat to our happiness, when in reality, the only real threat was sleeping in my bed every night. The turning point came when Victoria started suggesting solutions for the Lisa problem. At first, they were apparently reasonable suggestions. Why don't you ask for communication between you to be only by email? That way, everything is documented, and she can't say you agreed to one thing when you actually agreed to another. Then it evolved to more radical suggestions. Have you ever thought about asking for custody revision? With all these problems she has, you could get full custody of Ethan. When I explained that I had no interest in harming Lisa, just to satisfy Victoria's jealousy, she became visibly frustrated. It's not jealousy, Marcus. It's common sense. This woman is unstable. She could do something crazy at any moment. What if she decides she doesn't want to share Ethan with you anymore? What if she decides to move to another state with this new boyfriend? Victoria's catastrophic hypotheses were endless, and each one more dramatic than the last. It was as if she were writing a horror movie script, where Lisa was the villain who needed to be eliminated from the story, so everyone could live happily ever after. The obsession reached alarming levels when Victoria started researching Lisa on social media, public records, even her old jobs. Did you know she was fired from 2 jobs for conflicts with supervisors, and that she has a pending credit card debt? Information that Victoria couldn't know unless she was investigating my ex-wife like she was a criminal wanted by the FBI. Where did you get this information? The question came loaded with disbelief and horror. Oh, it's incredible what you discover when you do basic research on someone. Anyone can access this data, Marcus. It's public. But I knew it wasn't quite like that. That to get certain information you needed to know where to look, needed to have contacts or resources that normal people don't have. Victoria, this has already crossed all limits. You need to stop this obsession with Lisa. She looked at me as if I had just insulted her mother. Obsession? I'm trying to protect the person I love. If you can't see that this woman is a danger to our happiness, then maybe you're not as committed to our relationship as I thought. The discussion we had that night was the first big fight of our relationship, and I should have seen it as a giant red flag flashing in my face. Victoria cried, screamed, accused me of still being in love with Lisa, said I would never be able to truly love another person while I allowed my ex-wife to control my life. You want to know the truth, Marcus? You're a weak man, too weak to cut ties with a woman who only brought you suffering, too weak to fight for the happiness you deserve. Her words hit me like punches, especially because they touched on insecurities I didn't even know I had. Was I really weak? Was I being naive about Lisa's intentions? Victoria took advantage of my hesitation as a breach to advance. I love you more than any woman will ever love you, Marcus, but I won't keep competing with a ghost from the past. Either you decide once and for all that you want to be with me, or we end this story now. It was an ultimatum disguised as a declaration of love, and I, like an idiot, chose to interpret it as proof of passion instead of psychological manipulation. That night, while Victoria slept beside me after we had made up, I stared at the ceiling thinking there was something very wrong with that whole situation, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. What I didn't know at that time was that Victoria had reached a terrible conclusion in her sick mind. Lisa needed to be permanently removed from the scene. I didn't discover this right away, of course. I only started putting the pieces together months later, when it was too late to undo the damage. But looking back, I can see the signs I ignored, the subtle changes in her behavior that should have alerted me to what was coming. Victoria started asking even more specific questions about Lisa's routine, about what route she took to take Ethan to school, about what time she left work, about the model and color of her car. "Here's just so I can better visualize Ethan's daily life," she said when I asked why so much interest. "I want to understand what my future stepson's life is like." It seemed like maternal affection, legitimate concern from a woman who wanted to be part of our family. But in reality, Victoria was collecting data like a predator studying the prey's habits. And I, like a complete idiot, was providing all the information she needed to destroy my son's mother. For about 2 weeks, Victoria was strangely calm about the Lisa subject. She stopped asking obsessive questions, stopped criticizing every decision my ex-wife made, even stopped complaining when I received calls related to Ethan. At first, I thought she had finally understood that her obsession was hurting our relationship and had decided to be more mature about the situation. "I'm learning to accept that Lisa will always be part of your life because of Ethan," she said, in a conversation that should have reassured me, but actually gave me a chill I couldn't explain. There was something in the way she said "accept" that sounded more like solve than like true acceptance. Victoria started going out alone more often, always with excuses about work meetings or get-togethers with friends I never met. "I need some time to process all this, love. But don't worry, I'm fine." The way she smiled when she said this gave me chills, as if she knew something I didn't know, as if she were keeping a secret that would change everything. The week of the accident was strange from the beginning. Victoria was different, more nervous, but also more excited, as if she were waiting for something important to happen. She checked her phone constantly, as if expecting a specific call or message. When I asked if everything was okay, she said it was just work stress, that she had an important case coming to an end and was anxious about the results. "Soon, everything will be resolved, Marcus. Our life is going to get much simpler." The way she said this should have been a giant red alert, but I was so busy with my own work problems that I didn't pay proper attention. On Tuesday of that week, Victoria insisted on knowing exactly what time Lisa was going to pick up Ethan from school, because she wanted to send him a gift and needed to know if someone would be home to receive it. A lie, of course, but I didn't know that at the time. I provided all the information she asked for, including the fact that Lisa always took the same route from school to home, passing through that dangerous curve on the highway where several accidents had already happened over the years. The call came on a Thursday at 3:47 in the afternoon. I was in a meeting when my phone rang, and normally I wouldn't answer, but it was the hospital's number. My blood immediately froze, because hospital calls are never good news. "Mr. Thompson, this is Dr. Williams from Atlanta Regional Hospital. Are you the ex-husband of Lisa Parker?" Confirmation that it was the worst possible news. "Lisa suffered a serious car accident. She's alive but in critical condition. You need to come here immediately, especially because she listed you as emergency contact for matters related to your son." I hung up the phone with trembling hands, ran out of the meeting, and called Victoria on the way to the hospital. "My God, Marcus, how did this happen? Is Lisa okay and Ethan?" The concern in her voice seemed genuine, but there was something underneath, an anxious expectation that at the time I interpreted as shock, but now I know was anticipation of the results of her plan. When I arrived at the hospital, I found a scene that marked me forever. Lisa was intubated in the ICU with a swollen and purple face, several broken bones, and doctors talking about head trauma and possibility of permanent sequelae. Her car had flipped on the highway curve, exactly in the place I had mentioned to Victoria, and according to the first investigations, it seemed she had lost control of the vehicle for no apparent reason. "There were no other cars involved," explained the police officer who was investigating the case. "From the marks on the track, it looks like she tried to swerve from something, but we didn't find any animal or obstacle that would justify the maneuver." It was strange because Lisa was an experienced and careful driver, especially when she was with Ethan in the car. Fortunately, that day, she was alone, coming back from work before picking up our son from school. "The lady was lucky," said the doctor. "A few more minutes without help and we wouldn't have been able to save her." But while I heard these words, a voice in my head whispered that luck had nothing to do with it. Victoria arrived at the hospital about an hour after me, with that perfect performance of concerned and supportive girlfriend. She brought coffee, offered a shoulder to cry on, said all the right things about how we would get through this together. But I noticed how she observed everything around with almost scientific attention, as if she were evaluating whether the results corresponded to expectations. "Poor Lisa," she said, but there was a falseness in her voice that only someone who knew her very well could detect. When the doctor explained the severity of the injuries and the possibility of Lisa being months in recovery, I saw a quick glint in Victoria's eyes, as if it were a personal victory. "At least Ethan wasn't in the car," she commented, and there was a satisfaction in her voice that made my stomach turn. "Now you'll have to take care of him alone for a while. It's a big responsibility, but I'm sure you guys will manage." The way she said "you guys" instead of "we" made me realize that Victoria was already seeing herself as the new maternal figure in Ethan's life, as if the accident had conveniently removed the obstacle that prevented our perfect family. In the days that followed the accident, while Lisa fought between life and death in the ICU, Victoria transformed into the most attentive and helpful girlfriend in the world. She helped with everything related to Ethan, cooked, cleaned, even offered to pick up the boy from school when I needed to stay at the hospital. "Let me take care of everything at home, love. You need to focus on being strong for Ethan and helping Lisa in her recovery." It seemed like the most generous and understanding gesture in the world, but there was an efficiency in the way she took control of the situation that made me think she had already planned exactly what our life would be like without Lisa in the way. Victoria knew what Ethan's favorite foods were, knew his school routine, even knew where things were in Lisa's house that I needed to get. It was as if she had prepared for this moment, long before it happened. And when I expressed concern about Lisa's recovery, Victoria always had a ready answer about how these things happen for a reason, and how maybe it's the opportunity for you to build a healthier family dynamic. Every word of hers was like a drop of poison being injected directly into my bloodstream, making me question whether I really should be so worried about a woman who, according to Victoria, had only brought me problems over the years. The first days after the accident were a whirlwind of contradictory emotions that left me completely lost about what was right or wrong. On one side, I had Victoria being the perfect partner, taking care of Ethan as if he were her son, organizing our house, bringing food to the hospital, being my safe harbor amid the chaos. On the other side, there was Lisa in the ICU fighting to survive, depending on me to make medical decisions and take care of bureaucratic matters that only an ex-husband could resolve. It was like being pulled in two directions at the same time, trying to be the father Ethan needed, the responsible ex-husband Lisa deserved, and the attentive boyfriend Victoria expected. The weight of all these responsibilities was crushing me, and I was starting to understand why some men simply disappear when life gets too complicated. But running away wasn't an option, not with my son watching me and learning how a real man deals with life's difficult situations. I needed to find a way to balance everything, even if it meant tearing myself apart in the process. Victoria started showing signs of impatience with my dedication to Lisa's recovery already in the second week after the accident. At first, she disguised it well, made apparently innocent comments about how I was wearing myself out too much, and about how Lisa has family and friends who can also help. But as the days passed and I continued spending several hours a day at the hospital, coordinating with doctors, organizing physical therapy, dealing with health insurance and legal issues, Victoria became increasingly direct in her criticism. "Marcus, you realize you're neglecting your own son because of a woman who's no longer your responsibility." The question always came accompanied by that tone of voice she used when she wanted to make me feel guilty, as if I were a child doing something wrong. "Lisa is Ethan's mother, Victoria. Of course, it's my responsibility to help in her recovery." But she shook her head with that expression of disapproval that made me question whether I was really doing the right thing, or if I was being manipulated by old habits from a marriage that had ended years ago. The first ultimatum came disguised as a conversation about our future together. It was a Friday night. I had spent the whole day at the hospital accompanying one of Lisa's surgeries, and I came home exhausted, wanting just a hot shower and a quiet night with my improvised family. Victoria had made dinner, helped Ethan with homework, and created a welcoming environment that contrasted dramatically with the hospital stress. "Sit here with me, love. I need to talk to you about something important." Her tone immediately put me on alert, because I already knew that voice. It was the same one she used when she was about to give me an ultimatum, disguised as caring suggestion. I was thinking about our current situation, about how you're dividing yourself among so many responsibilities. Victoria took my hand and looked into my eyes with that intensity that once made me fall in love, but now made me uncomfortable. Love, you realize you're sacrificing our happiness, our relationship, Ethan's well-being, all because of a woman who made you suffer for years. Her twisted logic was always wrapped in gift paper, as if it were an expensive present I should be grateful to receive. Victoria, Lisa almost died. She's alone with no family nearby, trying to recover from serious injuries. How can I simply abandon her at this moment? The question came loaded with a frustration that had been building for days, but Victoria reacted as if I had just confessed I was still in love with my ex-wife. Abandon? Marcus, you're not abandoning anyone. You're choosing to prioritize the people who really matter in your life. Ethan needs his father present, not a man divided between the past and the present. She got up and started walking around the room, gesticulating as if she were making a presentation to a jury. And me? Where do I fit in this whole story? Am I just a supporting character in your life, waiting for the leftovers of attention you give to a woman who already hurt you enough? The drama in her voice was cinematic, but there was a calculated coldness behind it that made me think that speech had been rehearsed several times before being presented. Victoria knew exactly which buttons to push to make me question my own morality, my own sanity. The conflict escalation reached its critical point when Victoria discovered I had hired a private nurse to help Lisa in the first weeks after hospital discharge. I thought I was being smart, solving the problem in a way that Lisa would have the necessary care without me needing to be physically present all the time. It was a solution that would benefit everyone. Lisa would have professional assistance, I could focus more on my current family, and Victoria wouldn't have reasons to complain about my constant presence in the recovery process. But when I told Victoria about my decision, expecting approval or at least understanding, her reaction was the complete opposite of what I expected. You hired a nurse? With what money, Marcus? With money that should be being used to guarantee your son's future, to invest in our relationship? The questions came like machine gun bullets, each one more accusatory than the last. You realize you're literally paying to take care of a woman who's no longer your wife. This is completely inappropriate and disrespectful to me and Ethan. The discussion that followed was the most intense we'd ever had, with Victoria revealing levels of possessiveness and control I'd never seen before. Marcus, I need you to understand something very simple. Either you're really with me, or you're not. There's no middle ground in this story. She stopped in front of me and stared at me with a determination that gave me chills. If you continue spending time, energy, and money on Lisa, if you continue treating her as if she were your responsibility, then you're telling me that our relationship isn't a priority for you. The ultimatum was being delivered with the delicacy of a hammer hitting my head. I won't compete with a ghost from the past, Marcus. Either you cut these ties once and for all and commit to me and the future we can build together, or I leave your life now, before this hurts me even more. Victoria had tears in her eyes, but there was a cold determination in her voice that made me realize she wasn't bluffing. It was all or nothing, black or white, with no room for nuances or moral complexities, and I, like an idiot, started seriously considering whether she wasn't right, whether I really was being unfair to her by maintaining ties with Lisa. What led me to make the most cowardly decision of my life was thinking about Ethan. Victoria had planted in my head the idea that my dedication to Lisa's recovery was hurting my son, that he needed stability and not a father constantly divided between conflicting responsibilities. Think about Ethan, Marcus. He needs a stable maternal figure in his life, a family that really works. How will he feel safe if he realizes you're always running after his mother's problems instead of building a solid future here at home? Victoria's psychological manipulation was subtle, but devastatingly effective. She managed to make me feel like choosing to care for Lisa was an act of selfishness, as if being present in my son's mother's recovery was a betrayal to the new family we were trying to build. And the sickest part of it all is that a part of me started believing her, started thinking that maybe she was right, that maybe I really was being weak by not being able to completely cut ties with the past. That night, while Victoria slept beside me after we had temporarily made up, I stayed awake thinking about how it would be easier if Lisa simply disappeared from our lives forever, and I hated myself for having that thought, without imagining I was thinking exactly what Victoria wanted me to think. The final decision came on a Sunday morning, when Victoria served me coffee in bed and started talking about our future plans with an excitement I hadn't seen in weeks. Love, I was thinking that maybe it's time for us to take the next step in our relationship. How about we start officially living together? She talked about apartment renovation, about private school for Ethan, about trips we could take as a family, about marriage and our own children. It was a seductive vision of stability and happiness that contrasted dramatically with the emotional chaos I was living in recent weeks. But for this to work, Marcus, you need to be 100% present. You need to choose once and for all if you want to build this future with me, or if you're going to continue trapped in the past. The final ultimatum was being delivered wrapped in dreams and promises, but it was still an ultimatum. And I, tired of fights, tired of conflicts, tired of feeling guilty for every choice I made the decision that would change everything. I chose Victoria and gave up my moral responsibility to Lisa. The transformation in our relationship after my decision to distance myself from Lisa was almost magical, as if Victoria had saved the best version of herself to use only when she got what she wanted. Suddenly, the constant fights disappeared. The tension that hung over our house evaporated like morning mist, and Victoria returned to being that charming and passionate woman I had met at the cafe months ago. She woke up in a good mood, made elaborate breakfast for the three of us, helped Ethan with homework without complaining, and welcomed me home every night as if I were a hero returning from war. It was addictive, this feeling of domestic harmony, of having a family that worked like a well-oiled machine. For the first time in years, I came home eager to be with my family, instead of worried about what the next drama or conflict would be. Victoria had an impressive ability to create an atmosphere of contagious happiness that made everyone around feel special and loved, and I, like an idiot, interpreted this as proof that I had made the right decision, without realizing I was being rewarded for behaving exactly as she wanted. Ethan also seemed to be adapting better to Victoria's constant presence in our lives. The boy, who at first was resistant and distrustful, started opening up to her in a way that surprised and moved me. Victoria had discovered that my son was addicted to strategy games and started playing with him, creating a connection I never managed to establish. "Your dad is terrible at this game, right, Ethan?" she joked, and my son laughed in a way I hadn't seen in months. They spent hours playing on the computer, talking about tactics and strategies, and I found myself watching this interaction with a mixture of relief and gratitude. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe Ethan really needed a stable maternal figure in his life, someone who could be present consistently. Lisa, even before the accident, was always inconsistent in raising our son, alternating between periods of excessive attention and complete neglect. Victoria offered what Lisa never managed to give: predictability, emotional stability, and a constant presence that made Ethan feel safe and cared for. When my son started calling Victoria stepmom in an affectionate tone, I thought we had finally found our perfect family balance. The decision to officially move in together came naturally, as if it were the logical progression of a relationship that was working perfectly. Victoria sold her apartment and moved into mine, bringing along that sophisticated feminine touch that transformed our house into a real home. She redecorated the living room, organized the kitchen more efficiently, even created a home office where she could work remotely when necessary. "Now we really have a real family," she said while organizing our photos on a new shelf she had bought. And it really seemed like we did. Family dinners every night, weekends with planned activities, conversations about the future that involved all of us. Victoria talked about enrolling Ethan in a better private school, about language and sports classes, about educational trips we could take together. It was a vision of successful and structured family that contrasted dramatically with the emotional chaos that had characterized my life with Lisa. For the first time in years, I could imagine a stable and happy future, without constant dramas or uncertainties about my son's well-being. Victoria proved to be a born planner, always organizing events and activities that strengthened our bonds as a family. She planned a surprise birthday party for Ethan that was better than anything Lisa had ever organized, with themed decoration, personalized cake, and even some school classmates that my son rarely invited home. "I want Ethan to feel proud of our family," she explained when I praised her dedication. "I want him to know he can count on us for anything." and she was really fulfilling that promise. Victoria attended all school presentations, helped with science projects, even started going to parent meetings when I couldn't attend. Ethan's teachers started praising her, saying how good it was to see such an involved mother in her son's education. I didn't correct them when they referred to Victoria as Ethan's mother, because in a way, she was performing that role better than Lisa ever managed. It was surreal how our life had organized itself so perfectly after years of chaos and instability. It seemed like we had finally found our formula for family happiness. The marriage proposal happened on a Friday night, after a romantic dinner Victoria had prepared while Ethan was at a friend's house. She had transformed our living room into a movie scene, with candles, flowers, and a playlist of songs that marked our relationship. "Marcus, these last months have been the happiest of my life," she said while holding my hands. "You and Ethan gave me something I never knew I was looking for, a real family." When she knelt down and took a velvet box from her pocket, I almost fell off my chair. I know traditionally it's the man who proposes, but I couldn't wait anymore. "Will you marry me, Marcus? Do you want to make this beautiful family we built together official?" The proposal was as unexpected as it was perfect, and I said yes without hesitating for a second. The happiness on Victoria's face when I put the ring on her finger was contagious. And that night we made love with an intensity that reminded me why I had fallen in love with her in the first place. When we told Ethan the news the next day, my son was genuinely excited, asking if he could be the ring bearer and if this meant Victoria would officially be his stepmother. It was as if all the pieces of our life had finally fallen into the right place. The wedding ceremony was simple but elegant, exactly the way Victoria had dreamed. Just close family and intimate friends, in a small chapel in Savannah, followed by an intimate reception at a seaside restaurant that Victoria had personally chosen. Ethan was radiant in his little suit, carrying the rings with the pride of someone who finally had a complete family. When we pronounced our vows, I looked at Victoria and saw not just my wife, but the mother Ethan never really had, the partner who completed me in a way Lisa never managed. "I promise to love not just you, but also Ethan, as if he were my own son," Victoria said during the vows, and there were tears in everyone's eyes present. In that moment, looking at my new wife and my son smiling beside us, I thought I had found perfect happiness. Lisa was recovering well with the nurse I had hired. Ethan was flourishing in a stable family, and I had a companion who loved me and respected my responsibilities as a father. It was as if all the problems of the past had been solved with a magic wand, without anyone getting hurt in the process. It was too good to be true, and as I would discover soon, it really was. The honeymoon in Cancun was a dream come true. 5 days of paradisiacal beaches, incredible food and quality time as newlyweds. Victoria was radiant, more beautiful than ever, as if marriage had unlocked an even more stunning version of herself. We talked about future plans, about having our own children, about what it would be like to expand our perfect family. "Imagine how beautiful it would be to give Ethan a little brother or sister," she said, while we walked on the beach at sunset. "He would be an incredible older brother." The idea of having children with Victoria filled me with an excitement I hadn't felt in years. With Lisa, pregnancy had been complicated and stressful, full of fights and uncertainties. But with Victoria, everything seemed possible and natural. She would be a wonderful mother, dedicated, present, everything a child could want. When we returned from the honeymoon, we were both committed to the idea of expanding our family, and we started trying with the excitement of teenagers. It was as if our life had become a modern fairy tale, where all the problems of the past had been magically resolved, and all that remained was to live happily ever after. But like every real fairy tale, there was a dark side I hadn't discovered yet, secrets that would transform our perfect happiness into a nightmare I could never have imagined. During the first 3 months of marriage, our family routine worked like Swiss clockwork. Victoria had completely assumed the role of wife and stepmother, organizing our life with an efficiency that bordered on perfection. She woke up early to make elaborate breakfast, took Ethan to school when I couldn't, worked from home during the day, and always had dinner ready when we arrived at night. Weekends were dedicated to family activities, parks, movies, restaurants, short trips to nearby cities. It was a domestic life so stable and predictable that sometimes I wondered if I wasn't dreaming. Victoria seemed to have found her calling as wife and mother, and showed genuine satisfaction in taking care of both of us. "I've never felt so fulfilled in my life," she told me one night while we watched TV on the couch with Ethan sleeping between us. "You two are everything I always wanted." And looking at our perfect little family at that moment, I believed we had achieved something rare and special, a fresh start that worked, a second chance that really functioned. What I didn't know was that soon I would discover that our perfect happiness had been built on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and crimes that would change everything forever. The pregnancy discovery happened on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, but turned into one of the most exciting days of my life. Victoria had been feeling a bit nauseous in recent days, complaining of fatigue and changes in appetite, but we both attributed this to work stress and the changes of newlywed life. It was Ethan, ironically, who first raised the suspicion. "Dad, Victoria has been eating a lot of pickles lately. My science teacher said pregnant women have strange cravings." My son said this at breakfast with that brutal innocence only children have, and Victoria almost choked on her orange juice. We looked at each other for a few seconds, processing the possibility, before she ran out to the pharmacy to buy a pregnancy test. When she came back with those 2 pink lines that changed everything, the excitement in the house was contagious. Ethan jumped around the room shouting that he was going to be an older brother. Victoria cried with happiness, and I felt like I had won the lottery. It was as if our perfect family was about to become even more perfect, as if the universe was rewarding us for having overcome all the difficulties of the past. Victoria transformed into an exemplary pregnant woman from day one of those you see in magazines and romantic movies. She started taking vitamins religiously, signed up for prenatal yoga, and created a pregnancy diary where she documented every change in her body and every milestone of the baby's development. "I want to record everything so I can tell our son how special waiting for him was," she said while writing, and I was moved by such maternal dedication. Victoria read books about child development, researched about schools, even started learning about infant nutrition to ensure our baby would have the best possible diet. It was impressive how she managed to balance work, take care of Ethan, manage our house, and still have energy to dedicate herself completely to pregnancy. Everyone around us commented on how radiant she looked, how she seemed to have been born to be a mother, and I agreed completely, proud to have such a committed wife to our family. It was like watching an improved version of everything that had gone wrong in Lisa's pregnancy, as if Victoria was showing me how things should have been from the beginning. Ethan reacted to the pregnancy news with an excitement that surprised and deeply moved me. My son, who had spent years being an only child and the center of attention, completely embraced the idea of being an older brother. "Dad, I'm going to teach the baby everything. How to ride a bike, how to play video games, how to make the best jokes at school." Victoria fed this enthusiasm by including Ethan in all aspects of pregnancy. She took him to medical appointments when possible, showed him ultrasound images, even let him choose some baby clothes when we went shopping. "Ethan is going to be the best older brother in the world," she always said, and my son radiated pride every time he heard this. It was beautiful to see how Victoria managed to make Ethan feel important and included instead of threatened or replaced. She had this natural ability to make each person around feel special and loved, as if there was enough love for everyone without anyone needing to compete. Watching the interaction between them, I thought about how Lisa never managed to create this atmosphere of family unity, always generating jealousy and competition instead of collaboration and affection. The first trimester flew by in a cloud of euphoria and planning. Victoria wanted everything to be perfect for our baby, from the nursery to the birth plan. She obsessively researched hospitals, doctors, birth methods, as if she were preparing for a space mission. "Our son deserves the best of everything," she said when I suggested she might be exaggerating a bit in the planning. And really, after all the instability Ethan had lived through with Lisa, it was comforting to know that this baby would have from the beginning everything a child could need: present parents, stable environment, financial resources, and lots of love. Victoria was already planning the room decoration, researching private schools, even thinking about music and language classes for when the child was older. It was a completely different approach from the chaotic way Lisa had dealt with motherhood, and I felt grateful to have found a partner who took the responsibility of creating a life so seriously. Each medical appointment was a celebrated event, each ultrasound a new photo to be proudly shown to friends and family. The second trimester brought even more excitement, when we discovered it was a girl. Victoria was radiant with the news, already imagining all the things she would do with her daughter. Ballet, piano, cultural trips, conversations about life and dreams. "Ethan will have a little sister to protect," she said on the way back from the doctor. And my son in the back seat was so excited he wouldn't stop talking about how cool it would be to teach things to a younger sister. Our family dynamic was changing beautifully, with all of us preparing to welcome this new member, who was already so loved before even being born. Victoria started buying pink clothes, planning the room decoration with a princess theme, and even started thinking about names that would match our family. How about Isabella, or Sophia, or maybe something more unique like Valentina? She spent hours discussing possibilities, always including Ethan in the decision, making him feel like an important part of the process. It was impressive how Victoria managed to make everything seem magical and special, transforming every aspect of pregnancy into a family celebration. The decision to have a gender reveal party came from Victoria herself, who wanted to celebrate our daughter with all friends and family. "I want everyone to know how happy we are, how blessed our family is," she explained, while obsessively planning every detail of the party. Victoria organized everything with the precision of a general planning a battle. Pink and blue decoration before the reveal, special cake with colored filling, themed games, even a professional photographer to record the moment of discovery. It was impressive to see how she managed to balance full-time work with planning this elaborate party. But Victoria was always a perfectionist who didn't accept doing anything halfway. "Our baby deserves an unforgettable celebration," she said when I suggested we might be exaggerating. Ethan was super excited about the party, helping Victoria with invitations, choosing decorations, even practicing a speech about what it would be like to be an older brother. It was beautiful to see my son so involved and excited, actively participating in building our new family dynamic. The party would be the following weekend, and all of us could barely wait to share our happiness with the people we loved. The final preparations for the gender reveal party occupied the entire week, with Victoria coordinating suppliers, decorators, and guests with the efficiency of a professional event organizer. She wanted everything to be perfect, from the flowers to the lighting, including the menu and musical playlist. "This party will show everyone how special our family is," she said, while checking every detail for the 10th time. Ethan was officially in charge of helping with the special surprise that Victoria had planned for the moment of revelation, and my son took this responsibility very seriously, rehearsing his part as if it were an important school presentation. I watched all this preparation with a mixture of pride and gratitude, thinking about how lucky I was to have such a dedicated wife and such a collaborative son. Our house was transforming into a fairy tale setting, with balloons, banners, and decorations that made it impossible not to smile when entering. It was as if we were creating perfect memories that our daughter could admire years later, photographic evidence of how she was desired and celebrated from before birth. The day of the gender reveal party arrived with perfect weather and contagious excitement that took over our house from the early morning hours. Victoria woke up radiant, more beautiful than ever, with that special glow of a happy pregnant woman, organizing the last details while Ethan and I took care of last-minute preparations. Guests started arriving in the mid-afternoon. Work friends, neighbors, some relatives, even some parents of Ethan's classmates who had become close to our family. Everyone commented on how beautiful Victoria looked, how welcoming our house was, how beautiful it was to see such a united and happy family. "You guys are an example for all of us," said one of Victoria's friends, and I felt proud that we had managed to build something so special after so many difficulties in the past. The party was running perfectly, with fun games, delicious food, and an atmosphere of joy that made everyone smile. It was exactly the type of celebration our daughter deserved, surrounded by love and good energy from before birth. And it was exactly at this moment of perfect happiness that Ethan found something that would change everything forever, transforming our family celebration into a nightmare none of us could have imagined. The discovery happened by pure coincidence, one of those coincidences of fate that make you believe some truths simply can't stay hidden forever. Ethan had gone to get more ice in the kitchen during the party when he accidentally knocked over Victoria's purse, which was resting on a chair near the freezer. The contents scattered on the floor: lipstick, wallet, keys, and an old phone my son had never seen before. It was one of those basic devices without internet that people use when they want to keep something secret. Ethan, being a curious 13-year-old boy, picked up the phone and started messing with it while gathering the other things. It wasn't malice, it was pure adolescent curiosity, that irresistible need to understand how things work. But when he opened the messages, he found a conversation that changed everything. Work completed successfully. Lisa Parker was neutralized as requested, awaiting further instructions. The message was dated exactly the day of my ex-wife's accident. Ethan stood there in the middle of the kitchen, holding that phone like it was a bomb about to explode, processing what he had just read. My son may be young, but he's not stupid. He immediately understood what those words meant. What shocked Ethan most weren't just the messages about the accident, but an entire sequence of conversations that revealed a level of planning that went far beyond what any normal person would be capable of. There were messages about surveillance, about schedules, about routes Lisa took regularly. Target confirmed leaving work at 5:30 p.m., always takes the highway route. Curve at mile marker 15 is the ideal point. The details were too specific to be coincidence, information too precise to be obtained casually. Ethan continued reading, hypnotized by the horror of what he was discovering, and found references to our financial agreement and bonus for work efficiency. Victoria hadn't just planned to hurt Lisa, she had paid someone to do it. And the worst part is that the messages continued after the accident, with Victoria asking about Lisa's health condition at the hospital, as if she were monitoring whether the work had been successful. Confirm if Target survived, and what the medical prognosis is. We need to know if a second intervention will be necessary. Reading that was like receiving a punch in the stomach. My son realized he was holding evidence of a planned murder attempt by the woman he had learned to love as a stepmother. Ethan's initial reaction was complete denial, like any person would face when discovering someone close is capable of something so monstrous. He reread the messages several times, trying to find an alternative explanation, a way to interpret those words that didn't mean Victoria had tried to kill his mother. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe the phone wasn't hers. Maybe it was some kind of cruel joke or impossible coincidence. But the more he analyzed, the more obvious it became that there was no alternative interpretation. The dates matched perfectly. The details were too specific, and there were references to conversations Victoria had had with me about Lisa's routine. Ethan remembered how Victoria always asked questions about where Lisa worked, what time she left, what route she took to pick him up from school. At the time, they seemed like natural questions from an interested stepmother, but now they revealed themselves as information gathering for a heinous crime. My son stood there in the kitchen, holding that phone, realizing that the woman he had learned to call Mom was a potential assassin. The discovery was so traumatic that Ethan started trembling, not knowing whether to cry, scream, or simply faint. The dilemma that opened in Ethan's head was impossible for any 13-year-old boy to process. On one side, there was Victoria, who in recent months had become the maternal figure he always wanted, someone who treated him with affection, who was pregnant with his future sibling, who had brought stability and happiness to our family. On the other side, there was Lisa, his biological mother, who despite all her problems always loved him unconditionally and almost died because of Victoria's diabolical plans. How do you tell your father that the woman he loves, who just got married, who is expecting his child, is a dangerous criminal? How do you destroy the happiness of an entire family with such a devastating truth? Ethan was paralyzed by the weight of this responsibility, holding evidence that could send Victoria to prison, but that would also destroy our newly formed family. He put the phone back in the purse and returned to the party as if nothing had happened, but I could see in his eyes that something had changed drastically. During the rest of the celebration, my son watched Victoria with a mixture of horror and fascination, trying to reconcile the image of the caring stepmother with the reality of the woman capable of ordering a murder. The party continued without anyone realizing the drama unfolding in my son's head. Victoria cut the cake. We revealed it was a girl. Everyone celebrated and took photos, but Ethan was clearly mentally absent, participating in the movements, but without the genuine excitement he had shown during all the preparation. When guests asked if he was excited to be an older brother, Ethan responded with forced smiles and automatic answers. I noticed something was strange, but attributed it to the party's fatigue and excessive excitement of recent days. "Are you okay, son?" I asked when I noticed him especially quiet during cleanup after the guests left. "I'm just tired, Dad. It was a very intense day." But there was something in his eyes, a forced maturity that worried me. It was as if Ethan had aged years in a matter of hours, as if he had lost an innocence he would never be able to recover. Victoria, on the other hand, was radiant, celebrating the party's success and making excited plans for our family's future. The irony of the situation was painful. While she talked about how our daughter would grow up surrounded by love and security, my son struggled with the discovery that his stepmother was a dangerous criminal. The days following the gender reveal party were silent hell for Ethan, who carried alone the weight of a secret no teenager should have to keep. He watched Victoria interact with me and him, prepare coffee, help with homework, talk about the baby, and tried to reconcile these normal actions with the knowledge that she had ordered an attack on his mother. My son started having nightmares, losing his appetite, getting distracted at school. When teachers called reporting changes in his behavior, I talked to Ethan trying to understand what was happening. "It's just an adjustment period," Victoria explained when I shared my concerns. "Teenagers go through strange phases, and with the baby coming, it's normal for him to feel a little insecure." Her explanations seemed reasonable, and I accepted that my son was just going through a complicated phase. But Ethan was actually fighting an internal battle between protecting our family and seeking justice for his mother. He spent nights awake wondering if he should tell me everything, if he should go straight to the police, or if he should confront Victoria directly. Ethan's decision to tell me the truth came when he realized he could no longer live with that secret corroding his conscience. It was a Thursday night. Victoria had gone out for a prenatal appointment, and my son approached me in the living room with a seriousness that immediately put me on alert. "Dad, I need to tell you something very important. It's about Victoria and about my mother's accident." His tone was so grave I felt my heart speed up instantly. Ethan sat beside me on the couch and, with trembling hands, started telling everything he had discovered on Victoria's secret phone. Every word that came out of my son's mouth was like a stab in the chest. I listened in total shock, trying to process how it was possible that the woman I loved, who was carrying my daughter, was capable of something so monstrous. "Dad," I tried to find another explanation, tried to think it could be a misunderstanding, but there's no way. Victoria had someone hurt my mother. When Ethan finished telling everything, we both sat in silence for a few minutes, processing the magnitude of the discovery. I looked at my son and saw no longer a child, but a young man who had been forced to face an adult and traumatic reality, and I felt a mixture of pride for his courage and horror for the situation our family had become. The most devastating moment was when Ethan showed me some of the messages he had memorized, reciting word for word the evidence that proved Victoria's involvement in the accident. She asked about my mother's schedules, about the route she took, about everything, and I thought it was because she cared about us. The pain in my son's voice was unbearable, because he was realizing he had been used as a source of information for a heinous crime. Ethan had innocently provided all the details Victoria needed to plan the attack on Lisa, thinking he was helping his stepmother better understand our family's dynamics. "Dad, I feel guilty for telling her these things. If I hadn't talked about my mother's schedules, maybe none of this would have happened." It was as if my heart broke into 1,000 pieces, seeing my son blame himself for something completely out of his control. I hugged Ethan and said that nothing that happened was his fault, that Victoria had manipulated all of us, that children shouldn't be held responsible for adults' sick actions. But even while comforting my son, my mind was racing, trying to process how our perfect life had revealed itself as a lie built on a terrible crime, and how I should deal with a truth that changed absolutely everything about who I thought my wife really was. The first reaction I had after Ethan finished telling everything was absolute denial, as if my brain simply refused to process such devastating information about the woman I loved. "Son, are you sure you understood correctly? Maybe these messages are about something else. Maybe it's some misunderstanding." But even while speaking, I knew I was trying to convince myself of something that didn't make sense. The evidence was too specific, the coincidences too impossible, and Ethan wasn't a child who would invent such an elaborate and disturbing story. During the next few minutes, my mind raced through all the interactions I had with Victoria, trying to find signs I should have noticed, behaviors that should have alerted me to her true nature. Her obsession with Lisa, The invasive questions, the way she reacted when she learned about the accident, the poorly disguised relief when she knew Lisa would survive but be incapacitated for months. Every memory gained a new sinister meaning, as if I were watching a movie for the second time and finally understanding the clues I had missed in the first viewing. The man I thought I knew so well was discovering he had married a complete stranger, someone capable of things I never imagined possible. The horror of the discovery was amplified by the realization that I had been an involuntary instrument in Victoria's plan. Every piece of information I shared about Lisa, every detail about our routine, every moment I defended Victoria against my ex-wife had contributed to the crime being planned and executed successfully. My God, Ethan. I told her about the dangerous curve on the highway. I mentioned that Lisa always took that route. I gave her all the information she needed. The guilt I felt at that moment was overwhelming, as if I were an involuntary accomplice to an attempted murder. Victoria had used me as a source of information, had manipulated my feelings and trust to get the data necessary to almost kill my son's mother. And the worst part is that I had done this voluntarily, thinking I was being transparent and honest with the woman I loved. For years, I considered myself a person of good character, someone who always tried to do the right thing, but now I discovered I had been manipulated to participate in something heinous. The feeling of being so completely deceived made me question everything about myself, about my ability to judge people, about my own emotional intelligence. The next wave of emotions that hit me was a rage so intense that for a few moments I thought I might do something violent and irreversible. Victoria had not only tried to kill Lisa, but had manipulated my son, had used our family as tools for a terrible crime, had built our happiness on a foundation of lies and violence. She was pregnant with my daughter, sleeping in my bed every night, eating at my table, playing with my son, all while hiding secrets that could send her to prison for the rest of her life. The hypocrisy was nauseating. While I felt guilty for every moment I spent away from Lisa during her recovery, Victoria was probably internally celebrating the success of her diabolical plan. Every kiss, every "I love you," every intimate moment we shared had been a lie. Victoria didn't love me. She saw me as a trophy to be conquered, an obstacle that needed to be removed from Lisa's life so she could have total control of the situation. The woman I had fallen in love with never really existed. She was just a carefully constructed persona to manipulate me. But along with the rage came deep confusion about how to proceed, because despite everything, Victoria was still pregnant with my daughter. How do you deal with discovering your wife is a criminal when she's carrying your baby? How do you protect an innocent child from a dangerous mother? How do you balance the need for justice with the responsibility to protect your family? These questions tormented me for hours, creating an internal conflict that seemed to have no solution. On one side, there was the moral need to report Victoria to authorities, to ensure she paid for what she did to Lisa. On the other side, there was the fear that an arrest or police investigation could harm my unborn daughter, that stress could cause pregnancy complications. And there was also Ethan, who had already been traumatized enough by the discovery, and who would have to deal with the consequences of seeing his stepmother arrested. Every option seemed to bring devastating consequences for innocent people I loved. It was a moral dilemma that had no right answer, a situation where any decision I made would result in suffering for someone who didn't deserve it. Victoria's arrival home that night was one of the most tense moments of my life. She entered with that radiant smile as always, talking about the medical appointment, about how our daughter was developing well, about plans for the baby's room. The doctor said she's a fighter just like her mother, Victoria laughed while showing new ultrasound photos. Hearing these words was like being stabbed because now I knew exactly what kind of fighter Victoria really was. I tried to act normal, respond to her questions, pretend interest in medical details, but I was trembling internally. Ethan completely avoided any eye contact with Victoria, went straight to his room, claiming he had a lot of homework. Victoria noticed the strange behavior of both of us. Did something happen while I was out? You two are acting kind of weird. The simple question carried immense weight, because I knew that depending on my answer, our life would change forever. No, just a tiring day, I replied, buying time to decide how to handle the whole situation. But while Victoria talked about babies and the future, I looked at her and saw a complete stranger, someone who had deceived all of us so convincingly that it was still hard to believe the reality. The rest of the night was a torturous performance where I tried to act like the passionate husband excited about the pregnancy, while internally processing the discovery that I was married to a criminal. Victoria seemed especially affectionate that night, perhaps compensating for what she perceived as emotional distance on my part. She talked about names for the baby, about what our life would be like when the girl was born, about how Ethan would be a wonderful protective brother. Every word was like salt on an open wound, because I knew all these beautiful plans were built on lies and violence. When we went to bed, Victoria nestled in my chest as she always did, and I lay there rigid, trying not to show the disgust and rage I felt. How do you hug someone who tried to kill your son's mother? How do you kiss someone you just discovered is capable of ordering a murder? But at the same time, how do you reject the mother of your unborn daughter without causing suspicions or stress that could harm the baby? It was an impossible situation that left me awake all night, staring at the ceiling and trying to find a way out of that nightmare without completely destroying the lives of innocent people in the process. In the days that followed, I started observing Victoria with new eyes, looking for signs of the real person behind the perfect mask she wore. Small details that previously went unnoticed gained sinister meanings. The way she constantly checked her phone, how she reacted when Lisa was mentioned, how she talked about obstacles being removed from our life. Victoria had this disturbing ability to talk about terrible things, using soft and optimistic language, as if it were natural to eliminate people who interfered with her plans. Sometimes life removes toxic people from our path so we can be truly happy, she commented casually during breakfast, and I wondered if it was a reference to what happened to Lisa. I started to realize that Victoria was a consummate actress, capable of projecting any emotion or personality the situation required. The caring woman who took care of Ethan, the passionate wife who adored me, the dedicated future mother who obsessively worried about the baby's well-being, all of these were just facets of a carefully constructed persona to hide a much darker nature. And the scariest part is that she was so convincing that even knowing the truth, sometimes I found myself doubting the evidence, questioning whether Ethan had understood correctly, whether there wasn't some alternative explanation for it all. The pressure of maintaining the facade of normalcy while dealing with this devastating discovery started affecting my mental and physical health. I couldn't eat properly, couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate at work. Victoria noticed the changes and started showing concern that could have seemed genuine if I didn't know what kind of person she really was. "Love, you've been very stressed lately. Maybe you should see a doctor, get some tests done." The irony of receiving medical advice from someone who had tried to kill my ex-wife was nauseating, but there was something in the way Victoria insisted I seek medical help that made me paranoid. Was she planning something against me too? Was discovering the truth making me a threat that needed to be eliminated? These paranoid thoughts consumed me because I had learned the hard way that Victoria was capable of anything to protect her secrets and maintain control of the situation. Every affectionate gesture from her became suspicious, every suggestion a possible trap, every moment of intimacy an opportunity for her to do something terrible. It was like living with a predator disguised as a loving partner, never knowing when the mask would fall completely, and I would discover how far she was willing to go to keep her secrets buried. The discovery that Victoria had connections with dangerous people came when I decided to investigate more deeply the secret phone Ethan had found. During an afternoon when she went out for another medical appointment, I searched our house, looking for any additional evidence that could help me understand the real extent of her crimes. It was in the home office she had set up that I found a folder hidden behind other documents containing information that left me completely terrified. There were photos of Lisa taken at various moments and places, as if someone had followed her for weeks, receipts for payments made to a consulting company that was clearly a front for illegal activities, and most terrifying, a list with other people's names, including mine and Ethan's, with notes about threat levels and containment methods. Victoria hadn't just ordered an attack on Lisa, she was involved with a network of people who did this professionally. It was like discovering my wife wasn't just an occasional criminal, but part of an organization that eliminated people systematically. The woman who slept beside me every night had access to resources and contacts that could make any of us disappear without a trace. My investigation led me to discover that the law firm where Victoria worked was just one of the legal fronts for a much larger operation. Using information I found in hidden documents, I managed to trace some financial transactions and discovered a network of shell companies that moved enormous amounts of money with no clear origin. Victoria wasn't just a successful corporate lawyer, as I thought. She was a facilitator for people who needed special services that couldn't be obtained through legal means. Her specialty was identifying human obstacles in clients' lives and providing permanent solutions to these problems. Lisa had become one of these obstacles when Victoria decided she wanted our family just for herself. But the evidence suggested there were other cases, other people who had disappeared or suffered convenient accidents after hiring the services of the company where my wife worked. It was scary to think how many lives Victoria had helped destroy, how many families had been torn apart by the services she offered. And I, like a complete idiot, thought I had married a successful and ethical woman who simply had jealousy of my ex-wife. Contact with this criminal network hadn't started recently, as I discovered when finding documents dating back years before we met. Victoria had entered this dark world long before appearing in my life, which meant our entire relationship had been built on lies much deeper than I ever imagined. There were records of jobs she had coordinated in other cities, always involving people who became inconvenient for wealthy and powerful clients, ex-husbands who interfered with lucrative divorce agreements, partners who threatened to expose corporate fraud, witnesses who could incriminate influential people in corruption schemes. Victoria was an expert at making these people disappear in the most natural way possible: accidents, suicides, deaths from apparently natural causes. And the most terrible thing is that she was extremely good at what she did, because she had never been suspected or investigated for any of these crimes. Her facade as a respectable lawyer was too perfect. Her apparently normal life was too convincing. She had chosen this profession specifically because it offered perfect cover for her criminal activities, allowing her to move in high social circles while coordinating attacks on innocent people. The most terrifying discovery was realizing that our relationship hadn't been a romantic coincidence, but rather a meticulously planned job. I found evidence that Victoria had studied me for months before casually appearing at the cafe where we met. There were photos of me leaving work, reports about my financial situation, even information about my personality obtained through people who knew me but probably didn't even know they were being interrogated. Victoria had identified in me the perfect profile for the type of man she could manipulate: divorced, lonely, with shared custody of a son, financially stable, emotionally vulnerable. I was the ideal target for someone who wanted a stable domestic life as cover for criminal activities. Lisa wasn't just an obstacle to our love, she was an obstacle to Victoria's operation, because an unstable and unpredictable ex-wife represented an exposure risk that needed to be eliminated. Our perfect family was just another carefully constructed facade, and I had been recruited as an involuntary actor in a play I didn't know I was performing. Every moment of affection, every declaration of love, every plan for the future had been calculated to keep me exactly where Victoria needed me to be. The security system Victoria had installed in our house, which I thought was for our protection, revealed itself as a monitoring and control tool. I found surveillance equipment hidden in various rooms, including in Ethan's room, which allowed me to understand how she always knew exactly what we were doing and talking about. Victoria wasn't just living with us, she was constantly studying us, collecting information about our behaviors, our routines, our weak points. There were recordings of private conversations between me and Ethan, records of all our calls, even monitoring of our online activities. It was like living in a prison disguised as a home, where every movement was observed and analyzed. I started to understand why Victoria always seemed to know exactly what to say and when to say it, why she could anticipate our moods and needs in an almost supernatural way. It wasn't feminine intuition or genuine love, it was professional espionage applied to domestic life. And the scariest thing is that she had installed similar systems in Lisa's house, which explained how she got such detailed information about my ex-wife's routine to plan the attack. The extent of Victoria's criminal network was revealed when I intercepted a call she received late at night thinking I was asleep. The conversation was about a new job that involved eliminating a witness who threatened to expose money laundering operations for an important client. Victoria discussed methods and timelines with the naturalness of someone planning a vacation trip, as if destroying lives was just another item on her professional agenda. "The target has small children, so we need to be creative with the method," she said, and my blood froze realizing she was planning to orphan innocent children as part of the job. During the conversation, it became clear that Victoria was one of the main coordinators of this organization, responsible for recruiting executors, planning operations, and ensuring there was no evidence that could be traced back to clients. She wasn't just a participant in this criminal network. She was one of the leaders, one of the minds behind dozens or maybe hundreds of deaths over the years. And I, like a complete idiot, was providing the perfect domestic cover for one of the most dangerous criminals who ever existed. The most terrifying moment came when I realized Victoria knew I had discovered her activities. Small details started alerting me. Objects that changed places, documents that disappeared, the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. It was evident she had noticed my behavior changing, my emotional distance, my growing paranoia. And knowing what I now knew about her, I understood that being discovered by Victoria meant becoming the next target of her organization. "You've been very stressed lately, love," she commented during dinner, but there was a coldness in her eyes that made me understand it wasn't genuine concern. It was a professional assessment of a potential threat. Victoria was deciding if I represented a risk that needed to be eliminated, and this decision would determine whether my daughter would grow up an orphan of her father in addition to having a criminal mother. I realized I was in a race against time, trying to figure out how to protect Ethan and my unborn daughter from a woman who had spent years building the perfect identity to hide that she was a professional assassin. And the worst part is that she was pregnant with my daughter, which meant any action I took against her would also harm an innocent child who wasn't to blame for having a sociopath as a mother. The final confrontation happened on a Friday night when Victoria came home and found the evidence I had purposely left on the living room table. Photos, documents, receipts, everything that proved her involvement in the criminal network and the attack on Lisa. I could no longer live with that tension, pretending normalcy while knowing I was married to a professional assassin. Ethan was at a friend's house in an attempt to protect him from what I knew would be an explosive conversation. Victoria stopped at the living room door, looked at the evidence scattered around, and for the first time since I met her, I saw her perfect wife mask crumble completely. The sweet smile disappeared. The relaxed posture transformed into something predatory, and her eyes gained a coldness that made me understand why so many people had died by her order. "So you found out," she said simply, as if commenting on the weather. There was no surprise, no denial, no attempt at explanation. It was as if she were relieved to finally be able to stop pretending. "It took longer than I expected. You're more naive than I initially calculated." The naturalness with which she admitted everything was more frightening than any hysterical denial could have been. Victoria sat in the armchair in front of me with the posture of someone taking control of a corporate meeting, as if she were going to discuss contract terms instead of confessing a series of heinous crimes. "Marcus, you need to understand that everything I did was for us, for our family. Lisa was an obstacle that needed to be removed so we could be truly happy." The way she talked about trying to assassinate my son's mother, as if it were a favor she had done me, was nauseating. Victoria explained with clinical details how she had planned the accident, how she had recruited the executor, how she had monitored Lisa's recovery to ensure the work had been successful. She survived, which was inconvenient, but at least she was incapacitated enough to no longer be a significant problem. Every word was like a stab, because she was talking about an attempted homicide as if it were a business strategy that hadn't given the expected results. And the most terrible thing is that there was a cold logic in everything she said, as if eliminating inconvenient people were the most natural solution in the world for any interpersonal problem. When I confronted Victoria about the extent of her criminal activities, about the other victims, about the network of assassins she coordinated, I saw a gleam in her eyes that mixed professional pride with personal satisfaction. "You think I'm just a lawyer who went crazy with jealousy? Marcus, I built an empire. I have clients in several states who pay millions for my services." Victoria started detailing her operation as if she were bragging about a job promotion, explaining how she had started small, eliminating obstacles for wealthy clients in exchange for favors, until building an organization that offered permanent solutions for any type of human problem. "Problematic people disappear every day, Marcus. The difference is that I guarantee this happens professionally, cleanly, without complications for my clients. It was as if she were offering me a position in the family business, trying to convince me that participating in murders was a career opportunity. The complete absence of remorse or moral conscience was terrifying, because it made me realize I was dealing with someone who simply didn't function like a normal human being. The ultimatum came when Victoria realized I wasn't reacting with the understanding or acceptance she expected. Marcus, you have two very simple options. Either you accept the situation as it is and continue being my husband and father of our daughter, or you become a problem that needs to be solved. The threat wasn't disguised. There was no ambiguity in her words. Victoria was telling me directly that if I didn't cooperate, she would kill me. Think about Ethan, think about our daughter. They need a living father, even if that father has to keep some secrets. The way she used my children as emotional blackmail while threatening me with death showed a level of psychological manipulation that bordered on malevolent genius. Victoria had calculated exactly what my most vulnerable points were and was applying pressure with the precision of a surgeon. You can live a comfortable, prosperous, happy life as long as you don't interfere with my business. Or you can choose to be heroic and leave your children orphaned. The decision is yours. It was a perfect ultimatum, because any choice I made would result in devastating consequences for innocent people I loved. The most shocking revelation came when Victoria explained that our pregnancy hadn't been accidental, but rather part of a deliberate plan to keep me controlled. You think it was coincidence to get pregnant right after the wedding? Marcus, I stopped taking birth control months before you knew. I needed a guarantee that you would never be able to completely get rid of me. Discovering that my daughter had been conceived as a blackmail tool was like taking a punch in the stomach. Victoria had planned the pregnancy specifically to create a bond that would prevent me from reporting or abandoning her, knowing I would never do something that could harm my own daughter. Now we have a baby coming, a beautiful family, a perfect life. All you need to do is pretend this conversation never happened and continue being the dedicated husband you always were. The manipulation was perfect, because she had created a situation where protecting my daughter meant protecting an assassin and reporting a criminal meant harming an innocent child. Victoria had put me in a psychological trap from which there was no clear moral escape. When I tried to argue about going to the police, about doing the right thing, Victoria laughed as if I were a naive child, suggesting something adorable but impossible. Police? Marcus, you think I got where I got without having contacts in all spheres of power? I've had delegates, prosecutors, judges on payroll for years. She picked up her phone and showed me a contact list that included names I recognized from newspapers and television, people in positions of authority who supposedly should protect society from criminals like her. Any report you make will be filed before it's even formally registered. And you'll be classified as an unstable person, probably dangerous, who needs to be closely monitored. Victoria had thought of everything, had built a system where she was practically untouchable by legal authorities, and worse, she had fabricated evidence that could incriminate me as an accomplice to her crimes, documents that suggested I had voluntarily participated in the organization's activities. If you try to report me, you'll discover that actually you're the one being investigated for involvement in criminal activities. It was a perfect checkmate, where any move I made against her would result in my own destruction. The conversation ended with Victoria establishing the rules of our new reality. From now on, you'll continue being the perfect husband publicly. You'll take care of Ethan. You'll support me during pregnancy. You'll be the dedicated father our daughter deserves. She got up and walked to where I was sitting, placing her hand on my shoulder with a familiarity that nauseated me. Privately, you'll forget everything you discovered today. You'll stop asking questions, stop investigating, stop acting like you're some kind of detective, and most importantly, you'll make sure Ethan also keeps his mouth shut about what he discovered. The implicit threat to my son made me tremble with rage and fear at the same time. Victoria was making it clear she wouldn't hesitate to harm a 13-year-old child if it was necessary to protect her secrets. Our neighbors, our friends, our family will continue seeing a happy couple expecting their first child together, and you'll do everything necessary to maintain that image. It was as if she were giving me the script for a theatrical play where I would be forced to play the role of loving husband to a sociopath for the rest of my life. The end of the confrontation left me in an impossible position, where any decision I made would result in tragedy for innocent people. Victoria had created a situation where reporting her meant destroying my own children, but continuing with her meant being complicit in future crimes, and living in a lie that would consume me from the inside. "For you have until Monday to decide how you want our life to continue," she said before going upstairs to the bedroom, as if giving me a deadline to respond to a job proposal. "But remember, any choice you make will affect not just you, but Ethan and our daughter too. I hope you make the wisest decision." I was left alone in the living room, surrounded by evidence of Victoria's crimes, knowing I had 3 days to decide between being a coward who protects his children or a hero who condemns them. And while I heard Victoria moving upstairs, probably planning how to eliminate any threat I might represent, I started to understand that maybe there was no escape from this situation, that Victoria had created such a perfect trap that the only way out would be a solution none of us could predict or control. It was like being trapped in a labyrinth where all paths led to the same dark destination, and the only question left was deciding who else would be destroyed in the process. So were you guys shocked by this story? Or did you already imagine something like this could happen in real life? I still wake up some nights wondering if I made the right decision, if I could have done something different to protect my children without becoming an accomplice to a criminal. The decision I made that Monday changed everything forever, but that's a story for another video, if you guys want to know how all this craziness ended. What I can say is that sometimes the people we love hide secrets that can completely destroy our lives, and that true love should never be based on threats, blackmail, or crimes. If this story made you think about some situation in your own life, comment down below what you think you would do in my place, what other stories you want me to tell here on the channel. Subscribe, activate the notification bell, because I'm trying to create a united community here, where we can share experiences and learn from each other. And don't forget to comment what city you're watching from. I love knowing where you guys are following these insane real-life stories.